Today you will hear a cynical perspective from an arrogant lawyer on how your business will end. I'm joking a bit, but we will really talk about what to do with your business, what to do with your enterprise once it is already operational. My name is Kirill Juran, and I lead the SMPL Advisory Group, where we take care of digital entrepreneurs, particularly from the perspective of law, taxes, accounting, and business. And today I would like to talk about how to approach business once it is operational and how to deal with the fact that it probably won't function one day. What do I mean by that? Generally, business is such that at the beginning you put in maximum energy. It's essentially your main bet. Then, typically, once the business gets going, that old boring business that isn't in the startup style, the one that generates money and makes some profit, typically starts to generate some surplus. And at the moment when the business starts generating some surplus, the entrepreneur begins to consider what to do with it. I typically face two extreme cases. Either I reinvest everything back, ideally within one entity, meaning that all the cash is back in the business. I scale everything I can do. I simply expand some verticals, and I do everything in one basket. The second option is that I take everything out of that business. This means that business is just a money generator for me, which I channel into some of my other activities, whether they are investment or consumption. And business as a company is just a place for me to go for money, a place where I simply go to draw from the well. And I leave the well as it is. I do not develop it. I keep it independent. So I would like to share relatively straightforwardly some issues that we typically either address or observe with clients, something that I truly see in practice and which is, albeit sad, a reality. Before I start sharing, I need to say that the goal of this video is not to take away your ideals. The purpose of this video is essentially to convey the information in such a way that you, even if you have those big ideals of building a company that lasts forever, can create a business that is meant to survive you and your descendants, functioning and carrying perhaps your name so that you do it efficiently enough. Because typically, how you set up a company structure, how you establish internal processes, and your approach to the company generates some optionality, some possibilities that you can utilize or not, and at the same time, it provides you with a certain amount of anti-fragility, meaning you are more resilient to negative phenomena from below. The first thesis, which you may agree with or not, but going against it is somewhat like urinating against the wind, is that every business fails, every company eventually fails. Every company goes through a cycle like this. Of course, you will find exceptions, but otherwise, it is just a matter of time. It is an organization like any other. It simply experiences some growth and at some point it goes down. Typically, if you have a small business, it won't survive for long. This means that it is rare for you to find someone in a smaller business who can take your place and allow the business to grow. This means that I sometimes see cases where a person can be appointed in a small to medium-sized business who can manage to keep the business running or let it stagnate slightly. Rarely, but I have almost never seen a case where someone places a person in the business who, from the role of a manager, can actually boost that business, especially in the small and medium-sized sector. It's not that common, and in fact, it's something I wouldn't rely on at all because statistics say that your small and medium business is unlikely to survive you. What often happens if you don't have this awareness and you are running a business thinking that you will do this until old age and scale the business this way is that everything ends up in one basket. A classic situation looks like this. You have a business that initially grew, then generated some dividends, and was simply a nice, profitable, interesting business. You started to reinvest those profits back into the business, began purchasing, perhaps diversifying into stocks, or started buying real estate within the same entity. You essentially began accumulating those assets that are tangible, that have some form of value from the cash you generated. And then what happens is that at some point, these companies typically reach a stage where the business is somewhat declining, the business is kind of going down, the partner is already old, tired, the children are not that interested or not as talented, they don't have that drive. The business has somehow become established, and you suddenly have an entity whose business activities are declining, in which you have allocated what you have generated over the years into the positive. You have some buildings there, commercial properties, stocks, crypto. You have what actually has real value, and basically you are looking at a situation where over the course of a few years, everything you have generated is consumed by the declining business again because you are generating some operational losses. You know that the business is simply going down and you are trying to figure out how to extract it from the structure. This is a very common case that arises precisely from the fact that people do not consider that every business will eventually fail. At the same time, another thing I see that people underestimate is the fact that you don't always need to have the largest possible business. Let me give you an example. You can have a company that is worth 100 million, or you can have a company that is worth 70 million and has 20 million in cash. I discounted it by 10 million because you simply didn't boost the company to its maximum. So that's essentially what you paid for not reinvesting everything back into the business. But having a result of, for example, 20 million in cash, or in something like Berkshire, or in some real estate, in something that is less prone to fail, while also having a smaller business, often makes a lot of sense, because not always, even if people do not realize it, does the goal have to be to have the largest business that you can build. Very often the goal is simply to be well off. Having everything in one basket, even if it's a large one, versus having that basket a bit smaller, but at the same time knowing that in most cases in the future you won't be doing poorly. The second option is, for a large number of people, the one that will be personally more pleasant for them, at least from my experience. Another sad realization is that the next generation will have a different vision. I see this very often. We typically reach clients through that second generation, meaning that the first generation is somewhat punk. They built something in the 90s, now they have something, and now the son is taking over. Typically, the visions are completely different. If you are lucky and have good children, then their new vision or approach is actually a good thing. It is often rare for a son or daughter to simply just continue along the exact same path that their father or mother started. The vision that you have been fulfilling through your business for such a long time and on which you built that business will very likely change in the future, because if you have a small or medium-sized enterprise, it is typically heavily influenced by who is leading it. Typically, the vision is heavily derived from the person leading it. The optionality of the structure is closely tied to the different vision of the next generation. If you are not thinking about how to manage your assets, which means a mix of business and what that business generates, in the future, you are typically creating a problem for the next generation. They will have to either make a very strong cut into the business, start to carve it up, but they actually do not have good options to cancel something here, to disregard this, to focus on that, or to allocate more capital to this. Because if you always keep everything in one basket, in one little entity, boosting it all within a single entity, then the problem arises that if someone takes it over, taking over something that is actually mixed is very difficult. This creates complex situations, both in terms of taxes, leading to suboptimal solutions, and in terms of the fact that there is a lot of work to orient oneself in that additional mess from the past and actually give it some structure. And if that asset were structured over time, meaning that at least some assets would be separated from any business that generates risks and similar foundations, it would be much easier for the person taking it over. The last unpleasant realization is that no one cares about your business as much as you do. This also applies to the people who will take it over. It may not hold true without exception, but it is good to start from this perspective, as it is important to realize that actually no one cares about it, no one has put in as much energy, no one has put in as much work, and if you are deciding at the end or after some time what to do with your business, which may already have a certain trajectory, a trajectory that has gone down or something similar, it is good to recognize that the energy you have expended in that business is a sunk cost. You have built something, something has happened. I often see that the older generation, someone who has been in business for a while, is very emotionally attached to their business, which is natural because they have spent a significant amount of time on it and invested a great deal of life energy into it. This attachment to the business is essentially like an economically sunk cost, because you often won't get that energy back, and trying to save something that is already dead or simply dying is very often uneconomical and irrational. So what follows from this? Should I milk my company, leave it completely drained, and mainly extract as much as possible from it? No. At the moment your business reaches a certain size and starts generating more than you can consume, it is good to consider how the subsequent allocation of the capital generated by the business looks. This is typically the case if you are not building the company as a startup with the intention of selling it. In that scenario, it is very straightforward. So if it's some kind of dividend-paying, boring, mid-sized company that simply makes you 20 million in profit a year, and it's that old-school, dull business where money is made, it's good to think about what the structure of the assets will look like after you are gone, or what it currently looks like. It is valuable to carve out assets from the business. Individual business branches should be separated so that they can potentially be sold. Because if I mix a company that has 20 million shares of Berkshire with some trading company, it becomes very difficult to sell. You won't find a buyer who would want, for example, some Berkshire or something similar along with the trading company. It's good to have this cleared up from the very beginning. It doesn't cost much money. It actually requires more energy in terms of strategic thinking. But that is point one, to actually structure those assets and think about what will remain after the business ends. What exactly is it that the business has generated over the years? Some bricks, some businesses, stocks, publicly traded ones, and so on. Another point is to think about the structural delegation of roles. What do I mean by that? Very often it happens that an entrepreneur has a company, and in that company it is essentially like that is their main bet. But the company is not at all prepared for when the entrepreneur disappears. This means that the entrepreneur, the managing director of the company, has disappeared. And starting from today, you simply won't pay a bill or a larger invoice. And this transition, whether you have heirs or not, is extremely complicated. This means that it is good to consider the company in terms of approaches and the structure of its management, whether people can even reach what you have set up, and whether everything is not tied to your approaches and your email. Basically, you have invested a tremendous amount of energy into something, but you will bury it simply by disappearing from the world. What is another essential thing for me, actually quite trivial, but many people do not see it this way, is to define why I am actually in business and why I am accumulating that wealth. In particular, as I see it, the reason I accumulate wealth is that I want to have a retirement fund and consume it. I want to pass it on to future generations. I want to establish a family and some ancestral property. I want to donate it to charity. I just want to have options and die with 100 million. And after that, I don't care. Actually, the definition of why I have that money is very important to me, and not many people have it clearly defined. So they can simply answer that. And with that comes the question of what my benefit from business is. Is it that I want to earn the maximum amount of money? It doesn't necessarily have to be. Is it that I want to live the most free life possible? Very often it is. Is it that I want to be as independent as possible and as anti-fragile as I can? That is also a very common reason. It is good to ask oneself what it is that drives my business, because it is very simple. Often it is that I want to be free, but in the end, it gets mixed up with wanting to generate as much cash as possible. In fact, having defined what my purpose in this business is, what I am building and why, is an essential matter, even though it may seem relatively superficial. That is more or less what I wanted to tell you, without any hunger or storage. It is somewhat of a reaction to what we commonly deal with. I have compiled some of my inputs on how I see it. I believe it could be useful for someone. I also want to say that if you are looking at business and the structure of your assets, I find it very useful to view it from the perspective of optionality. Essentially, the goal of how I structure my assets and my business is to have as many high-quality opportunities as possible, meaning I want to have the chance to do something as often as possible, but not the obligation. At the same time, I want to be as anti-fragile as possible, so that in as many cases as possible, which I cannot influence due to events that I am not even able to predict, I can avoid being broken. This means that, in fact, Kirill should be well off in as many cases as possible. This is a useful perspective for me on how to look at things, and it sometimes helps with complex decisions about what to do with the surplus and so on. That's all I wanted to say to you. Thank you very much for watching until the end. Think for yourself. No one will teach you that. Goodbye.